Delicate subject. Chapter 17. Clamor and pain woke her. She couldn't take in her environment immediately because the internal feedback was too much. Hunger, thirst, pain. Those were amplified, somehow synthetic experiences. How long had she been out? She was composed of nausea and shaken, cold and glaring and ugly, and it dumped her directly into the imperative to panic. An armored hand hit her across the cheek. Again, that was what had woken her. The ring and pain soaked fast into the overall cacophony of physical feedback, leaving only a faint warmth and sting that was overwhelmed by other sensations. Focus, assessment, report. Vakarian. 2 Vakarians, one leering, one hitting and leering, in a closed and ugly room. Bare bulb, low-tech, peeling walls, broken floor. Opposite wall dark glass. 2-way mirror? Crazed and cracked glass, but intact. No windows. So not a ship, a building. No ship could fly this filthy. Well, maybe she should lower her expectations. These were Vakarians. Didn't feel like a ship, though. No referred hum or noises that a ship would put out. Gravity. She couldn't move. She couldn't tell if there was more or less of a drag on her. Was she in an abandoned building? How long had she been out? The Vakarian hit her again, and she felt warm blood trickle, and it had the effect of making her think of being a berserker, the warriors that went on an indiscriminate rampage triggered by the taste of blood. That would be nice. Super strength. Slaughter. She would have made a good berserker if she didn't so very much enjoy seeing heads explode at the end of a scope. She tried to move just a little, but it was useless. She was restrained. Strapped to a hard-backed dolly, she thought. Maybe not terribly stupid Vakarians. She wasn't going to panic, and she couldn't kill them right now. She engaged again with the impossibility of how much her body was screaming at her. If she had been alone, she'd scream along with it. But she wasn't gonna while being hit. Not unless they earned it. A question she wasn't gonna get the answer to kept recurring. How long had she been out? She'd gone without food for days in the past, gone without water for days in the past, never felt this particular flavor of ravaged. She could feel that her mouth had moisture, that her stomach was not sunken or worse, distended. Her skin looked fine. She was not suffering from dehydration or malnutrition. The sense of her body was that she was intact, exactly as she had been when she left the Normandy, short some medication. She wasn't hungry, but she had a disconnected sense of starvation. She wasn't thirsty, but she had a focused sense that she was going to die of thirst in the next few minutes. There were insistent imperatives, like waking with a massive cramp, like drowning, being unable to breathe, her brain screaming about everything wrong. But it was from her brain only. Her lungs took in air normally. Her brain was telling her to do something, do anything, or she was going to die right now. She set that aside and devoted the thin band of cognitive thought available to her to focus. Vakarians. You can't do anything about food or thirst or hitting them. She tried to beat back panic while keeping her face incoherent. She tried to reverse the full-blown trend she'd woken up to. She observed her body's reactions and kept the expression of pain on her face, didn't let her muscles or eyes indicate that she was regaining any control. She wasn't a berserker if she didn't have an outlet. It'd be a waste of energy. She struggled to test her bonds, but without appearing to do it. They were beyond secure. Hole straps. Wide. She thought of her omni-tool, looked down while maintaining incoherence and unfocused eyes to see superficially healed holes in her arm. Her forehead was strapped, but she could see with her eyes tilted down and her arm angled in. Maybe she could tell time by the wounds. Her omni-tool had been surgically removed, along with every single one of the accessories she'd had, including ampules of neurotoxin. Pressing her back against the solid plate she was strapped to, she could feel other losses. Implants and upgrades gone, holes left. New holes where accessories and upgrades had not been. Why new holes? The symbolic glowing light around her wrist was gone. Fury and despair were mixed into the din of internal feedback. Okay, maybe smart Vakarians. Or Vakarians in the employ of someone smart. She had to go to the bathroom so badly that she felt the cramped shaking of an extreme denial of the impulse, but again, no physical correlation. Some sort of... She was fine, she knew it, other than the holes. Her leg hurt, but the normal amount. The holes might have happened immediately after her being taken, and then had been treated with Metagel, and it might have only been a few hours since it happened, transport and surgery included. They could have tortured her and had her conscious when they cut into her, but they didn't. They had removed all implants to disable tracking and self-defense. She had been anesthetized and treated, then left in a room with Vakarians. Vakarians with no questions. The Vakarian had hit her, but could have broken her teeth, shattered her jaw. This was at most a split lip and some scrapes. Probably just to wake her up, and then it felt so good he did it again. Gently, for a Vakarian. This guy was not in charge. Lyrian guy was staring at her, but at a distance. No threats made. These guys were not in charge. Had he asked a question? She hadn't heard. Too distracted. Listen. You have to listen. She could be anywhere by now. There was no way for the Normandy to trace her. Anybody sophisticated enough to detect and remove the tech she had cleanly would catch everything. No hope there. She should have followed up on that tracker chip option. Too late now. The only things she had to go on were her own wits, and those were frayed and distracted and approximately 1 millimeter from being lost to screams and panic. Beyond all that, she wanted to have sex so badly that in the background was the tight cramp of denied tearment and reverie rolled into a deeper, addictive hunger. Bad, Shepard. This is bad. Thank you, Commander Obvious. She was suffering from every need and addiction her body was prone to feel. All the things that had established wide bounds of experience, potentials of pain and potentials of denied pleasure, ratcheted up to inchoate and insatiable need. Instant torture. No need for physical harm. It leaves no marks, takes no effort, takes no time. Nice trick. She needed a game face. She couldn't keep her face from contorting, from nausea, cramping, retching, and shivering, so, by default, that was her game. She was going to keep it up. She took every impulse her body gave her and stopped suppressing them, only holding back screams. She allowed the moans and whimpers that clawed at her lips and felt some relief. She hadn't made eye contact yet, hadn't appeared lucid yet. She could string that out. The hidden Vakarian wore rust-red armor, and his skin was a lighter green than the other, who wore black armor. She'd call him Mo. Mo spoke. "She's awake, Vitkiv." The other Vakarian sat back. "The great Commander Shepard." She'd call him target practice. Targ for short. Vitkiv was in a sari, violet skin and grey dablin, leather clad in the same colors. She moved the way Kasumi did. This could explain why nobody had asked her any questions. An Asari with no morals and a little talent could make interrogations obsolete. This is bad, Shepard. Really, really bad. That was it. Really, really bad. As bad as possible. That was her game face. Stay the fuck out of my head. She'd resisted more. She had resisted virulently hypnotic Thane. She'd gone around with a Prothean artifact. The Ara had told her she had an extraordinary will, and now she was going to put it to the test. Vitkiv stood back, hips shot, casually assessing Jane's only somewhat exaggerated convulsions. "I'm not going in there. She's a mess." "She looks fine to me. I'd go in there." Vakarian wit. Vakarian laughter. Vitkiv's nose wrinkled. "You're a Varen-humping slime mold. You had to drug her and tie her up to keep her from killing you." Damned right. Still gonna kill everyone in this room. Even if I don't do it, being in this room with me is a death sentence. A balloon of pride and hope puffed out like an expelled breath, but was obliterated in the next few moments by the other shrieking input. It had been erased, but it was like having her lungs filled. Panic pressed back momentarily. Relief. Vitkiv looked at her, shook her head, and her distaste was obvious. So maybe she did not have options? Vitkiv was also not in charge, or was in a hurry. The Asari woman rethought it appeared, and spoke to the air. "She's got too much in her system. It's just going to be chaos. Tone it down before her brains get scrambled." There was a long suspended moment of waiting, and the door opened. A downcast and huddling Drell woman, young and cowering, walked up to Shepard and shot a needle into her efficiently, using the back of her immobilized hand. She was wearing gloves, so there was no venom contact, but cool fingertips bracing the side. She skittered back out, and within a few seconds the horrific sensations cleared. Not entirely, but enough. The relief was massive. Shepard looked at her retreating back and thought that she was too accustomed to Drell being able to do or be anything, and this creature, let's call her Skidder, could be anything from a drudge to the bad guy. She could be in charge. They could all be Skidder's critters. Speculation stopped when cool fingers slid to her temples and she felt the intrusion of foreign will. Vitkiv was good at what she did, her touch reminiscent of the consort. She was an oasis, relief after the pain and distress. Jane felt a beginning slide into gratitude before she caught herself. She gathered every bit of random pain she could find, and right now, that was a lot. She gathered indecision, fear, pain, horror, Loss threw in a few Prothean images of blood and crawling wires, a few flashing thoughts of charging husks, dragon's teeth, what it felt like to have her lungs freeze, the smell of thresher maw, melted flesh, and the fresh and raw threat of sexual slavery with the echoing reality of rape. She waited until Vitkiv came close to the outer margins of real contact other than soothing introduction, and threw it all at her, pouring the force of every scream she'd suppressed into an internal push of all the disconnected horror she could muster. Vitkiv screamed, and Shepard pretended to faint. The Asari's fingers jerked away as though seared. Through the blurry view from surreptitious open slits of her eyes, Shepard could see a thin trail of purple blood from Vitkiv's nose. That's right. You don't want to come in here. I'm a mess. Go with your first impression. Breathing without pain felt so good, and she slumped realistically. So good. The compensating rush of endorphins her body had made to counteract the storm made her shaky and faint, and she struggled to reproduce the deep breathing of sleep, not this shivering wreck of fluttering air. Liara and Samara had explained the process. Liara had demonstrated, shown her how to make the sessions easier, reduce fatigue and stress. Jane had also asked about how to resist unwanted intrusion. An Asari in someone else's head needed the residing presence as a tour guide. An unconscious target wouldn't work, at least not initially, because symbols had to be translated through the being that created and stored the symbols as memory. An Asari could be lashed with pure emotion to the sympathetic nervous system, risk burning themselves out like a fuse blowing. Vitkiv would recover and the damage wouldn't be permanent, but maybe she wouldn't try again. Hopefully not soon. 99.99% of Asari had ethics and an abhorrence of forced contact, but some of them specialized in it, and some of them got very good at it, having lived a long time and gotten a lot of practice. Someone would be paying Vitkiv well and would expect accurate results that interrogation and torture couldn't provide. Jane briefly considered having a private conversation with Vitkiv if she tried again, negotiating a separate deal, but she was not willing to trust anybody. Establishing rapport was not something she was willing to do with an Asari interrogator. She couldn't allow Vitkiv access to her symbols. Her code would be broken. She could be translated as though she'd handed over her own Rosetta Stone. Vitkiv would be able to navigate Jane's head without her assistance. So the Asari would get a dose of pure, painful chaos with every attempt. Jane had lots of that. Vitkiv wiped her nose and flicked the blood to the floor. If she wasn't broken before, she is now. Whatever you did to her, all she has is amplified suffering. She won't recognize her own name. Vitkiv was trying to figure out how to get the job done. You and me both, honey. All three left the room. Mo took the opportunity to take one last shot to her face, but again, not hard compared to the damage his fists could do. Patterns formed over time she could not measure. Interrogation and restraint, drugged stupors, lost time after injections. She was being preserved, and that scared her more than the information they wanted. Scared her more than torture, and her mind churned out the worst endgame she could conceive. Something she'd already faced, having her dead body fought over, bid on. Only now, bonus, she was alive, and in command of an exceptional ship, and an exceptional crew with only one mission. Worst case, She was going to be indoctrinated. And that took time. That's what the holes were for. They needed her able-bodied so she could command, and they were going to get her back on the ship somehow with the authority to indoctrinate the crew of the Normandy. They wouldn't let her go until she was fully broken, her loyalty proven. Wouldn't torture be so much easier? She'd talked Saren into eating a bullet, but it had still been too late for him, and he'd contorted into the creature incubating inside of him, flesh stripped away. He'd almost killed her after agreeing she was right. She thought of the holes in her arms, thought about the ones in her back, and wondered if that was how they poured it into her, if Vitkiev would break down her mental defenses and make it easier, if behind this wall, around this room, were artifacts, if things were in her blood, twining around neurons. It would be so much easier if a few Batarians just beat her up and left it at that. Panic and horror crowded in, and she hung there, boneless, held up by restraints. Strategy. She needed a strategy. Focus. You still don't know enough to come to a conclusion. This is speculation. Maybe the Batarians would come back and beat her up, and she could go back to run-of-the-mill menace that she knew how to deal with, straight up to and including dying. What are the odds that this is run-of-the-mill? Someone had tracked her movements well enough to know that when she left the Normandy, she went on a celebratory tour of the Citadel that always went to the same location. So far, that was a pattern of only 3 events, so they had begun planning after the second event. High investment, low odds of success, extrapolating from 2 points in a line. Possibly she had been set up, but this was doable without an internal leak, with only the information that the Normandy was docking. Likely they had access to CSEC monitoring of security checkpoints, external surveillance, or internal tapping. Expensive. Planning involved a seamless capture that had its own convenient transport built in that she authorized and paid for. They'd be long gone before any alarm was raised. Enough time to change transport 10 times over in the Citadel alone to misdirect anybody watching to follow any set of false trails they wanted to create. They had likely set a male human agent at any access point she would have taken. This was someone with the connections to get experimental and unlisted, very effective drugs. Someone who could afford an Asari specialist. So go with the worst-case scenario and not the run-of-the-mill. If it turns out they're just going to torture you to death, count your blessings. I am so sorry, Thane and Garrus. I have to work on the assumption that you can't come rescue me. I can't get back to you. And if I have a chance, I have to kill myself before my chances are gone. They could do the mission without her. They couldn't do it if she went back indoctrinated. She knew every weakness to play. She could lie to and fool some of the smartest people she knew because they would want to believe her. You're gonna get weaker. And you're gonna break. You know you're gonna break. They don't have to know that you're broken. You can fake being broken before it actually happens and conceal when it does happen. Keep the secret that you're broken. That's what would normally work, but she had to get out of this, not to break out, but to put a bullet in her own brain. Something inside her revolted, and she couldn't tell if it was self-preservation, exhaustion, or being drugged. Things tightening on neurons because motivations now were shadow plays and smoke. I'll have a front row seat to indoctrination. I'll see how it works. I can tell Morden. I can show Miranda. If I don't smile at them, tell them I'm fine, and then inject them with something myself. Beatific zealotry on my face and in my voice, like Dr. Kenson. Once, she'd only had herself, tied to a bed, waiting to die. She'd lived. He hadn't. Once, there'd been only her and a thresher maw and the melting bodies of those she'd ordered to fight and she tried to protect, until she had retreated further back from her cover when she couldn't help them anymore, when there was nothing left to help. The Alliance came for them and found only her. She was good at surviving, and right now, that was not good. Her captors were counting on her will to survive. They were going to break her mind but keep her body intact. All of her will to get back to her command would serve their purposes. She had a strategy for pain, for despair when it became unbearable. Nobody else's meditations or focus and techniques ever worked for her, but this did. When it got hard, she counted. She counted as high as she could, and then she'd start over when she lost her place. It was simple, and when it became hard, she could tell how far her mental acuity was slipping. There had been times in her life when all she'd had left was the ability to chant the sound. 1, 1, 1, 1. Inside her head. And she held on to breath, held on to living, and that's all she could do. And she was proud of herself for doing it. Don't think about time. Don't wonder when it's going to be over. She would watch for actions she could take, watch for opportunities, but she needed to protect herself from despair. She needed to guard her state of mind when nothing was happening, the time when her mind spun with no traction into scorched smoke if she was not cautious. She had to endure the pain, keep it separate from her. She would not become the pain. She had to plan for 2 things: escape, and making sure that if she escaped, she wouldn't ruin everything she loved. She had to find a way. Maybe they'd let her out of restraints with good behavior. Maybe she could carve a message on her body, find a shard of something and scratch indoctrinated on the bottom of her foot. Why did it have to be such a long word? No, nothing external. Someone would be looking. Someone would see it, see her do it. Maybe swallow something she couldn't claw from her own body, something that could be found on a scan. They'd take her to the medbay and Dr. Shakwas would insist. Shepard, why did I find a poker chip with the letters INDOC scratched on it in your large intestine? Yeah, that's gross, but she would do it. If she could. She had to think. No. Evidence Karen could find would be evidence any medical specialist they had here raking her over during unconscious exams could find. She would not risk that. Her only advantage was her appearance of cluelessness and ignorance, and being caught conceiving of subterfuge would rob her of that. They could not learn anything more about her from her actions that could prevent the action of killing them. Do not think of Garrus. Do not think of Thane. Think about keeping the secret of when and how you break. Watch both paths, escape and death, and pray to every force of fate she didn't believe in that she won the bet and could make it back to the Normandy without losing herself, without selling everyone she loved into servitude. She had to escape in order to kill herself. Escape first. She couldn't avoid it, couldn't avoid taking the chance that if she escaped, she'd be indoctrinated, or Jane, to die. She knew herself that her actions would become automatic, choices lightning, and thought overridden by instinct. Breathe. Count. She was left alone for unmeasured time. She breathed. She counted. She couldn't keep the promise to herself to not think of Garrus, to not think of Thane. Her mind sought them like a mindless creature with an instinct, like a flower turned into light, an underground, burrowing thing that turned away from gravity toward warmth. She couldn't help it. She would lose count and spend moments thinking of Garrus's arms around her, sternum blade at her back. She would think of Thane's voice giving her courage, giving her the strength to appear to be something she was not. Unlike the numbers she counted that were symbolic and had always comforted her under stress, the thoughts of Garrus and Thane were not mechanical, but organic. When she counted, they would add their voices to hers, count along with her, break off into their own voices if she faltered. She heard what she was so desperate to hear them say. Things she needed, things she couldn't resist. Garrus had said that after she died, she'd talk to him, comforted him, and she knew he'd want her to have the comfort of hearing him say, "Be strong. You've been through worse. I know you won't betray us. You won't betray yourself. You've died for Spirit's sake. I feel sorry for these poor, ignorant assholes who have no idea what you are capable of doing." Thane had tried to reach back into her history and eliminate threats he'd only guessed at. And she could imagine him with his forehead pressed to hers, hand at the back of her neck, and the force of his silence that could carry her when she could not speak. His endurance, his example, was willed into her bones. This is but a trial, Siha, and you will rise above. Allow me. It sounded like the way he'd asked her to grow her hair out, entirely certain they'd survive the collector base, or seeming so. And they had. Her hair was longer now. Allow me to be with you. Allow me to comfort you. Allow me. She decided she would think of them, despite the fact that when the thoughts of them ended, despair rushed in and she temporarily lost her grip entirely, crossed the line, fought back blindly, tenuous and desperate, needy and weak. Whatever happened to her, they would care. What had Garrus said? His father could cause him distress, but couldn't wear him down fully because what? Because he'd had too many Too many approving voices. She might be doomed because she had too many approving voices, but she let it flow to burn inside her mind like a small sun. Because she'd seen Saren. Under his bravado and upgrades, he had been afraid and had turned from his mission, his people, had tried to save himself. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Words from Earth, from Africa. Words to remember when she was going nowhere, could not go fast, but wanted to go far. She found gratitude in the fact that they were not here, were not captive with her, only here in Turian spirit and drill, discipline, passion, and strength. Farron had been tortured for 2 years for daring to rescue her body. She had 2 years to go in order to beat his record, and she would do it. Garrus had mourned her for 2 years. She had 2 years of daily choking, mourning, and grief to go. Check back in 2 years of fighting, 2 years of torture, and then you can feel sorry for yourself. Thane had suffered for 10 years after Erika's death, and years before that, and now still. Check back in after 33 years of torture. See how you stack up against your heroes then, Shepard. Not until then will you pity yourself. You can do it. It's been done. It's been done by better people than you. They need you to live up to their examples. You need you to live up to their examples. At other times, the idea of Thane's hands closing around a particular Vakarian's neck, slashes from Garrus's talons on an Asari throat, because he would prefer that over a gun, would lend her their fire and relentless energy when hers failed. She found that with them keeping her company, watching over her, speaking to her softly, she did not want to let them down. And she had more courage than she would have had alone. She had more despair than she would have had alone. She had people outside herself to live for, people outside herself to save with her death. They wouldn't be able to find her, wouldn't be able to rescue her body, but they rescued her mind, second by second, with each internally chanted number and murmured, imagined echo of their approving voices. I will have too many approving voices, and I will not save myself, but I will save you. My loves of sunlight and shadow, one at each hand, holding mine in the dark and cold, whispering to me, and bringing me back to counting, bringing me back to breathing, bringing me back to knowing who I am. She saw lots of Skitter. She was being fed. She was being maintained by Skitter with hunched, miserable servitude, or the appearance of it. Skitter fed her by hand, and she chewed and swallowed. Jane wanted to show good behavior, dulled capacity, wanted to be set loose. With a reluctant twitch, Skitter would inject her with something. Skitter never spoke, but there was surreptitious regret in her demeanor, beaten down, a faded drone. She was wretched, and Jane felt sorry for her even as she felt the need to beg and bargain bubble up behind her lips, only held back by the rule to never admit she was broken. She spoke lies, if she spoke at all. She never spoke unless she had to. Mo and Targ yelled at her and hit her after different injections. One series of injection of something had made her feel drunk, but she could navigate it. It wasn't on the level of reverie or tearment, and it was easily pushed aside while she pretended to be in a stupor. The lowering of her inhibitions made her mostly have to struggle to not laugh at all the accumulated farce. Crying she allowed, but in this bizarre place she was contorting her face to not laugh and say, "You poor bastards, run, now. I am not kidding. You guys are gonna end up dead, either by my guys or the ones that are gonna avoid paying you. You are so incompetent." They were made of growl and anger and asked questions she didn't know the answers to anyway. Who were the Alliance agents in Vakarian space? Nobody gave a shit about Vakarians, not even Vakarians. Still, she spent some time acting befuddled and then spent a great deal of time trying to earnestly and reluctantly convince her Stalin tactic interrogators that Kahira Balak was a double agent. Because fuck that guy. It wasn't exactly fun, but it was defiance fuel that seeped into her bones. Insidious warmth. The "everything sucks and you're about to die from it" injection was the worst, although it wasn't ever at the high dosage she'd first gotten. She'd learned to imitate her initial reaction, and they'd lessened it until it was bearable, mostly. She still had to restrain herself from saying she'd probably suck Batarian cock for the fluids and chew for the protein. And then she had to not laugh. They leered and threatened, and she had many examples of Batarian wit. But not once did they touch her other than the obviously held back and progressively more frustrated smacks that were dwarfed by Garrus hitting her in a spar. Granted, not in the face, but they hit her only in the face, and only lightly. She knew they wanted to hit her really hard. They wanted to hear different screams, to cause rivers of blood and ribbons of flesh. She knew someone was watching that wouldn't let them haul off and give her what they believed she so dearly deserved for her lack of cooperation and stupidity. They both longed to see her bleed, and she began to feel eventually that they were more tortured than she was. Okay, maybe that was exaggerated, but she might make it out of this alive. And they would not. Their last hour spent getting nothing they wanted, nothing they needed from her. She needed to know who was behind that glass, and she had no clue, no hint, and no opportunity to investigate. I don't want you to know that I'm half a breath from selling my soul for a sip of water, even though I know I do not need a sip of water. Skidder makes sure I drink. I am keeping that fucking half of a breath. It's mine. And so is my soul. Then you are both dead, clueless men walking. Sleep was bad. She didn't know how to keep the secret in her sleep. She didn't know how to count. Vitkiv got creative and used that as a loophole, a back door where she could piggyback on dreams and try to steer Jane into wanting to escape them to a more relevant subject. Anything about the Normandy was a relevant subject. Jane would get an injection of something that kept her under an extended trance, and Vitkiv would keep her company for that dream time. Vitkiv had tried to get close to conscious memory, but Jane had managed to hold her off, both of them traumatized. But in her dreams, she couldn't do a thing about it. Once Jane became lucid, she would tip experience into pure hell, and she sent it out like a shockwave directly into Vitkiv's mind over and over. And she got a sick satisfaction from hearing Vitkiv scream. More defiance fuel that kept her warm. Unfortunately for Vitkiv, she never got close to any information on the modern Normandy. The people there, the tactics, the intelligence. Because Jane steered her directly into Threshermaw burns or freezing lungs or any of the other horrors living in her head that gave absolutely no information except pain. Dreams seem to access the most painful aspects of an event, things that perhaps didn't exist. Garrus or Thane's bodies melted, taking the place of Alliance soldiers. Her 2 men were constant themes in her dreams, and although she couldn't change how often they showed up or how much they meant to her, she could sometimes affect where it went, blur the conclusions that could be drawn. For misdirection, since Thane was not a well-known member of her crew, but Garrus was, she tried to invest him with the memories of Urim. Gave him Urim's name. Vitkiv had her relive moments over and over, the Asari's apprehension growing, but she was unable to get any other access, and likely unable to stop this line of interrogation until she provided results. Vitkiv made laborious reports, trying to glean information from Jane's unconscious state that translated into Jane's true mental state. Vitkiv was growing more and more frustrated and possibly scared of the lack of progress she was making. She also almost got the feeling Vitkiv was starting to admire her, perhaps didn't want to get the job done. It was confirmed once when Jane lay there pretending to sleep, as Vitkiv recorded another report, including editorializing opinion and not just repetition of events. Subject was 19, same age as the previous iterations of this dream. Research verifies time and place, name of instructor, attendance of subject to the academy. Instructor name Corbin Yales. Refer to prior sessions 14, 29, 37. Instructor of ethics at military academy training. Female classmate of subject confided abuse. Subject stalked instructor. She had preliminary infiltrator training but was caught. Insufficient stealth skill. Inability to detect unexpected perimeter traps. Subject had arranged leave, misdirection, created evidence that she was off Earth on a Mars tour of archaeological digs, assuring nobody was looking for her, establishing an alibi. He had a cabin in woods near to the academy, location verified by classmate. Real location verified through time frame research. Subject went looking for proof before reporting him for misconduct. Motive consistent with an extensive history of human military cover-up of sexual abuse. Corbin captured the subject, tied her to a bed, and repeatedly raped and beat her for 4 days. No food, no water. Escape made possible by rope fraying on a metal section securing the headboard, assisted by her providing friction while he was off property at work. Corbin boasted to the subject of having killed prior victims, promised to kill her the same way, their bodies dumped in a concealed emergency well on a remote property. Subject freed herself, drank water from a faucet but ate no food in order to avoid creating evidence she had been free. Obtained a weapon, went back to the bed, tied herself in a way that made her appear identically restrained, and then waited approximately 5 hours until assailant returned to the property and repeated prior pattern of rape and abuse. During the act, subject cut his throat with the concealed weapon. No hesitation. Note, primary focus in dream state and likely awake state was attention to victim's eyes and wound. Not a fear response. Predatory response. Psychological profile gained from incident. Subject is methodical and capable of deceit in extremes, able to tolerate extensive torture and abuse. Assessment. Research of actual event and time frame records indicate she was on Mars at the time of the incident and after. Tickets and picture of her trip available. Surveillance at checkpoints indicates her presence. She either hired someone who looked like her to go on this trip or provided sophisticated hacked evidence that under investigation raised no suspicion. Subject returned late to base with injuries she attributed to exotic fighting instruction, which was deemed compatible with her psychological profile and supporting photographic evidence of her visit on Mars, accepted as reasonable cause. She refused medical treatment or examination. Transportation authorization blamed for her late return. Minor demerit earned into record for AWOL. First offense, never repeated. No punishment other than a warning and denial of weekend leave privileges for 6 months. The body of Corbin Yales was never recovered. Her absence and his missing person status were never correlated. He is still listed as missing. Cold case. The cabin burned down, but the property was not in his name and was not correlated to either his disappearance or her absence. Investigation attributed the fire to electrical failure. There had been no accelerant to denote arson. Although she was not permitted to leave base, indication is that she did so, was undetected, and located the body dump site. There was an anonymous, untraceable tip 3 weeks after her return to base that led to the discovery of a recently uncovered well. 14 female bodies ranging in age from 13 to 17 exhumed. Vitkiv announced to the room in general. She's fucking playing us. All I can get out of her head is that if she had a moment free, I'd be dead. Vitkiv looked down at Shepard's theoretically unconscious form. I am not getting paid enough for this shit. I like you, Jane. That's bad for business.